She is 15, maybe 16, and she insists that divine voices murmur to her in the quiet fields of Domrémy. The year is 1425. The 100 Years' War drags on like an infected wound, and France looks half swallowed by English ambitions. She hears the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, or so she says. Imagine a teenager today claiming a direct line to archangels, and then imagine entire armies actually listening. That is Joan of Arc's opening act. Historians still argue whether she suffered from epilepsy, schizophrenia, or a level of faith so absolute it bent reality around her. Either way, her visions are enough to propel her out of obscurity. Think you could stomach medieval justice? Spoiler: most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. Before we march into that spectacle, let's ground ourselves. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Seriously, it's fascinating seeing where this story reaches. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. And remember, not everything in Joan's tale is what the legend insists. Some of it is stranger, and some of it is darker. Picture this: your name trending worldwide, but not because you nailed a song on TikTok. Instead, your neighbors are whispering that angels speak to you, while church officials roll their eyes and mutter about heresy. That's Joan in her village, already unsettling people before she even rides into battle. Her father panics, insists she is deluded, even threatens to drown her if she leaves. He is not alone. Local gossip threads, medieval edition, hum with speculation that she is bewitched, but Joan, stubborn to the bone, refuses to back down. One quirky detail: she persuades the town's local captain by predicting the outcome of a small skirmish days before it happens. Whether coincidence, luck, or divine hotline, it works. She convinces powerful men to grant her an audience with Charles, the Dauphin of France. The Dauphin, himself desperate, half broke, and unsure if he will ever wear the crown, is intrigued by this fiery-eyed peasant girl. Here is where Joan makes her first theatrical move. When Charles tries to test her by hiding among courtiers, she picks him out instantly. Historians still argue whether she had spies tipping her off or whether she truly recognized him by some mystical means. Either way, it cements her aura. One day she's herding sheep, the next she's convincing royalty she can rescue France. Her arrival at court throws everyone into disarray. Imagine the royal advisors staring at a farm girl claiming she'll lead armies and restore the crown. These men are seasoned, cynical, and tired of war, yet somehow her conviction slices through their skepticism. What's stranger, she insists on donning male clothing, armor, and short-cropped hair. This shocks not only society's fashion police, but also the church. Cross-dressing is officially considered sinful, but Joan insists it is protection against assault and a necessity for her mission. That tiny detail, the trousers, the armor, later becomes one of the central charges against her. The year is 1429, and Joan marches with the French to lift the siege of Orléans. Think of it, a teenager commanding hardened soldiers, and they follow. At Orléans, she is wounded by an arrow, but still refuses to leave the field, shouting encouragement while bleeding. The army, electrified, rallies. Orleans is liberated, and suddenly Joan of Arc isn't a rural oddity, but a national sensation. Rumors spread that she cannot be killed. Some claim she glows during battle. Was it charisma, luck, or simply a desperate army grasping at hope? Whatever the truth, victory cements her reputation as divinely chosen. But while Joan rises, enemies multiply. The English despise her, branding her the Witch of the Armagnacs. The Burgundians, French allies of the English, whisper that she is Satan's pawn, and in Paris, clerics mutter that no young woman should wield such power. Her victories make her legendary, but also dangerous. In medieval politics, nothing inspires betrayal like a teenager outperforming generals. Still, she presses Charles toward Reims, where he is crowned king in a glittering ceremony. This is her triumph, the moment she insisted the voices foretold. Yet even here, danger lurks. Many nobles resent being overshadowed by a girl in armor. Some soldiers scoff privately, though not too loudly, lest her fanatics cut them down. And somewhere in the shadows, plans to capture her begin to form. The legend of Joan of Arc is about to shift from radiant victory to the suffocating darkness of betrayal. because for every crown placed upon a king, there is a price extracted from someone else, and Joan's payment has only just begun. The coronation of Charles at Reims shines like Joan's greatest victory, but in truth, it is the beginning of her unraveling. She rides at the king's side in armor that gleams under cathedral light, yet she doesn't get a throne, a title, or wealth. She asks for nothing except the continuation of her divine mission. That alone unsettles the court. Think about it. Politicians thrive on favors and rewards, yet this teenage commander only cares about the voices in her head telling her to drive out the English. For men whose loyalties hinge on bribes, that level of faith feels like a liability. Historians still argue whether Charles truly trusted her after Reims, or whether he simply tolerated her popularity because it kept the people inspired. Either way, the uneasy bond between peasant girl and king begins to crack. Joan pushes to march on Paris, but Charles hesitates. His advisors mutter that she is reckless, that her victories cannot last. The king listens because kings tend to prefer caution that preserves their comfort over boldness that risks their crown. When Joan leads troops against Paris, the assault falters. She is injured again, shot through the leg with a crossbow bolt, and her soldiers pull back. For the first time, the aura of invincibility around her begins to fray. Soldiers who once swore she glowed with divine fire now whisper that maybe the light has dimmed. It doesn't help that Paris remains in English and Burgundian hands. In war, loyalty is as fragile as glass, and one failed siege can shatter belief. One quirky footnote: Joan was so insistent about keeping her battle standard close that she sometimes carried it herself rather than let it out of sight. That wasn't vanity. She claimed the banner inspired troops more than her sword did. Still, critics mocked her, suggesting she loved the pomp of waving fabric more than the hard work of tactics. Modern historians chuckle at that. They know soldiers fought harder under her presence than under any other general of her time. But such quirks added fuel for her enemies. Back at court, she discovers the cruel paradox of power. The same men who had cheered her now smile through gritted teeth. Every success she earns makes her less manageable. It's the classic medieval boys' club, a circle of lords who cannot tolerate that a farm girl overshadows them. Her status begins to rust. She is allowed fewer resources, fewer soldiers. Requests for reinforcements are ignored. It's sabotage, subtle but relentless. By 1430, the tide turns against her. She rides out again, refusing to fade quietly into court life. This time, though, she is less protected. Outside Compiègne, during a skirmish, Burgundian troops close in. Joan holds the rear guard, still believing divine aid will shield her. Instead, she is dragged from her horse and captured. There is no dramatic heavenly rescue, no fire from the sky to save her. She becomes a prisoner of Burgundy, and within months, she is sold to the English for a tidy sum, about the cost of a good castle. Historians still argue whether Charles could have ransomed her back. The answer seems obvious. Yes, he could, but he didn't. Perhaps he feared her return would outshine his own authority. Perhaps he decided that divine voices had become too expensive to keep around. Whatever the truth, Joan learns the cruelest lesson of power. Allies are fickle, and kings are the most fickle of all. In English custody, she is treated not like a noble prisoner of war, but like a dangerous heretic. Her armor is stripped away. Her hair is shorn. She is paraded as proof that the French crown's miraculous victories were nothing more than trickery. To the English, she is both terrifying and convenient, a living symbol they can crush publicly to humiliate France. Still, she refuses to break. Even in chains, Joan claims her voices guide her. English guards mock her relentlessly, calling her pucelle, maid, with sneering irony. Yet some among them reportedly fear her, muttering that witchcraft, not faith, explains how a teenager defeated their armies. One rumor claims they kept her in an iron cage to prevent escape. Another insists she survived poison attempts. Historians still debate how much is fact and how much is embroidered legend. But either way, the English seem desperate to control her body and her image. She waits in dank cells while her captors prepare something far worse than a battlefield. In battle, pain is quick and chaos gives cover. In captivity, every moment is stretched into a cruel theater of humiliation. The greatest cruelty is not the iron around her wrists, but the silence of her so-called allies. France's king, newly crowned thanks to her, sends no rescue. She is abandoned, not by enemies, they at least are honest, but by those she lifted to glory. In the long pause before her trial, Joan learns that betrayal does not burn with the fury of fire. It corrodes quietly, like rust eating away at armor, and that corrosion is about to expose her to the deadliest stage of all, the courtroom, where words, not swords, will decide her fate. Chains bite into her wrists, not the dramatic battlefield bonds of a captured knight. No, these are deliberate instruments of humiliation. Joan sits in a dank, English-controlled cell at Rouen, guarded not by neutral wardens, but by soldiers who mock her daily. Normally, captured nobles are treated with dignity, held until ransom, but she is no noble. She is an anomaly, a peasant girl who commanded armies, claimed divine voices, and made kings bend. That makes her more threatening than any sword. Her interrogations begin in drips and stretches. She faces clerics who sharpen scripture into knives. They want to break her, not through torture racks or red-hot irons, though those linger in the shadows, but through questions designed to trap. It's a psychological siege. One wrong word, one theological slip, and her fate is sealed. Imagine a modern courtroom where the judge and jury are all paid by your enemy, and you're given no lawyer, only priests demanding you explain why God would choose a teenage girl instead of them. That's Joan's reality. She answers with unnerving composure. Asked about her voices, she insists they come from God. Asked why she dresses as a man, she explains it is protection against assault in prison. Her responses are so sharp that not even the most hostile scribe can twist them without looking absurd. Historians still argue whether her brilliance in testimony was innate intelligence or divine inspiration. Either way, she outsmarts men twice her age, with degrees and ranks she could never dream of. The quirky detail, Joan reportedly teased her interrogators. When asked whether she was in God's grace, a trick question since claiming certainty was heresy and denying it was also heresy, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may He keep me there." A line so perfect it silenced the room. Some scholars believe this may have been the single most eloquent defense of her entire trial. Imagine being a grumpy bishop expecting an easy win and instead being dunked on by a teenager in chains. Yet her cleverness only increases their fury. Every sharp answer, every refusal to bend, reminds them she is dangerous even without a sword. So they circle tighter. They accuse her of witchcraft, of consorting with demons, of blasphemy. They press her on her clothing, men's tunics, hose, armor, because if they can prove cross-dressing, they don't even need witchcraft. It's enough to condemn her. Historians still argue whether the English truly cared about theology or whether the trial was simply political theater staged to discredit Charles, the king she had crowned. Joan endures months of this grinding pressure. The trial is not one day, not one hearing. It drags from February to May 1431. That's nearly half a year of relentless interrogation. She has no friends, no advocates, only hostile judges and hostile guards. One can imagine this psychological weight. Many grown men in her position would have confessed anything to make it stop. Yet she resists, but resistance cannot last forever. Eventually, fear cracks even steel. The clerics present her with threats, execution by burning. They read out her supposed crimes, and they force a confession of sorts, a shaky abjuration written for her, renouncing her voices. Was it trickery? Was it coercion? Historians still argue. What we do know is that she recanted almost immediately, insisting her voices returned stronger than ever. That reversal seals her doom. To the court, it proves obstinacy. To the English, it ensures they can stage the final spectacle, the burning. Yet the image of her breaking and then reclaiming her strength is haunting. It shows she is not made of myth. She is flesh and bone, terrified and fallible, but still unwilling to let her story end on their terms. In these final months of questioning, the trial becomes less about theology and more about theater. English captors need her destruction to echo loudly, to humiliate France, to rewrite her victories as illusions. Every page of testimony is a performance piece. Every question is designed not for truth, but for spectacle. And Joan, whether she intends it or not, plays her role as defiant martyr perfectly. Still, she remains a prisoner. Her body weakens under confinement. Rumors swirl. Some claim she attempted escape, once even jumping from a tower into the moat below. Whether myth or fact, it captures the desperation of a teenager caught in machinery far larger than herself. She isn't a saint yet. She is just a girl who doesn't want to burn. The final interrogations close in like vultures. She is confronted again and again on her clothing. One morning, guards strip her of women's dress and force her into men's clothes. Later, clerics use this as proof she relapsed into sin. It is almost comical in its cruelty, a trap she cannot escape. In their twisted logic, her survival hinges not on God, not on armies, but on fabric choices in a prison cell. By now, Joan must know the truth. Her king will not come, her allies will not ride, her enemies will not stop until she is ash, and the courtroom drama, stretched for months, is nearly ready for its grand finale. The crowd is gathering outside Rouen, restless for blood and fire. They don't know it yet, but they are about to witness a burning that will echo across centuries. The courtroom stinks of incense and sweat. Clerics shuffle parchment, pretending this trial is about divine order, when in reality it is a carefully rehearsed execution script. Joan, barely 19, sits in her cell awaiting each summons, knowing every question asked is already answered in the margins of their paperwork. Yet she still insists on defending herself. That stubborn spark unnerves them more than any alleged witchcraft. The trial is a grotesque parody of justice. At least 70 judges and clerics are involved, most of them hand-picked by the English. Imagine a corporate boardroom where every seat is filled with executives who already signed your firing papers before the meeting started. That's Joan's trial. Historians still argue whether some clerics secretly pitied her but were too afraid to speak, or whether nearly all of them relished the spectacle of dragging down a girl who had shamed armies. They hammer her with theological traps. They demand to know if her voices contradict scripture. They insist saints wouldn't tell her to fight wars. They circle back again and again to the trousers. One of the more absurd charges is literally that she wore men's clothing stubbornly. It's hard not to laugh at the idea that a peasant girl in armor was more threatening to church order than armies slaughtering civilians by the tens of thousands. Yet here they are, scribbling furiously about fabric instead of famine. Still, Joan outsmarts them often enough to leave lasting echoes. Her famous line about God's grace, delivered with calm clarity, lingers in memory like a knife slipped past their defenses. Even English scribes admitted her intelligence impressed them. The problem was never her wit. It was that no amount of wit could overcome a verdict written in advance. The English strategy is transparent. Prove her a heretic. Prove Charles's coronation worthless. Prove France's victories the result of sorcery instead of divine favor. Joan herself is almost secondary, a pawn sacrificed in a propaganda war. Yet paradoxically, her resistance transforms her from pawn to queen on history's board. Every defiance, every refusal, makes her legend larger. The very trial meant to erase her is what preserves her voice in records centuries later. The quirky detail? During breaks in questioning, Joan sometimes complained about the food in prison, saying she'd rather die than keep eating it. There's something disarmingly human about that. The supposed witch, miracle worker, and prophetess reduced to grumbling about bad medieval catering. It's also a reminder of how young she is. Soldiers see her as a leader, judges see her as a threat, but her complaints sound like a teenager stuck in detention. Her trial drags through weeks of repetition. She is worn down by fatigue, malnutrition, and psychological strain. At one point, she signs a short abjuration, renouncing her voices under threat of burning. The clerics triumphantly parade it as proof. Yet within days, she retracts it, declaring her voices have returned stronger than ever. Historians still argue, was her first signature coerced through fear of fire, or was it trickery? Documents she didn't fully understand? Either way, her refusal to stay silent seals her fate. Now the judges have what they want, a relapsed heretic. That label carries the death penalty. Once again, the men shuffle papers, pretending it is God's will rather than English convenience. In reality, the verdict is not divine judgment, but political necessity. The crowd outside Rouen grows restless. Trials are not entertaining enough. They want fire, and the English are more than willing to provide. On May 29, 1431, Joan is condemned. The bishop pronounces her fate, cloaking the decision in Latin, but the essence is simple. She will burn. For a moment, even hardened clerics hesitate, aware that burning a teenage girl might look monstrous. But the machinery of power rolls forward anyway. Joan hears the sentence with remarkable calm. She asks for a cross. A sympathetic English soldier breaks a small wooden stick into a makeshift crucifix and hands it to her. It is one of the rare acts of kindness recorded in the trial. Even among enemies, some cannot bear to see her stripped of all humanity. Still, the machinery grinds on. She is dressed once again in men's clothes, both a symbol of defiance and the technical pretext for execution. Guards prepare her for the pyre. The streets fill with onlookers, and the bishops rehearse their solemn condemnations. In the days leading to her death, she prays constantly, claiming her voices assure her of salvation. Whether that gave her strength or merely deepened her torment is something historians still debate. The night before, Joan reportedly weeps. She is not a fearless statue. She is a girl about to burn alive, yet she insists again that everything she did was commanded by God. Those words, recorded by hostile scribes, slip past the trial's intended propaganda. They show not a witch, but a believer who clung to faith until the very end. When dawn breaks on May 30th, Rouen is buzzing. Crowds swarm the marketplace, jostling for a view. For some, it is curiosity. For others, a hunger for spectacle. Medieval punishments were as much theater as deterrent, and the burning of Joan promises one of the grandest shows of all. As the trumpets sound and soldiers march her out, she clutches her wooden cross. The crowd hushes, sensing history twisting in front of them. No one knows whether they are watching the destruction of a fraud or the making of a saint. The pyre waits, the stage is set, and fire, once a metaphor in her visions, is about to become reality. The square at Rouen swells like a carnival, though the air is heavy with something uglier than joy. Soldiers ring the platform, priests pace in stiff robes, and thousands of onlookers push shoulder to shoulder for a glimpse. The trial is over, the verdict already written. Joan will burn. Picture the scene. She is 19, shackled, dressed once more in the sinful men's clothes that had given her enemies their excuse. Her short-cropped hair exposes her face fully to the crowd, removing even the smallest dignity of concealment. She clutches a small wooden crucifix. Witnesses say her lips never stop moving, prayers whispered too quickly for any scribe to catch. A preacher climbs a makeshift pulpit beside her. His sermon drones on about heresy, witchcraft, the necessity of cleansing fire. To modern ears, it would sound more like propaganda than theology, a speech designed not to save souls, but to convince a mob that burning a teenager is noble. Even in the 15th century, some bystanders reportedly murmur that this feels less like holy justice and more like state-sponsored cruelty. Historians still argue whether the crowd leaned sympathetic or hostile. Records were written by the victors, who preferred to claim approval. Joan's voice cuts through the droning sermon. She cries out for a cross. One sympathetic soldier, an Englishman no less, snaps two sticks together and hands it to her. She kisses it, holds it tight against her chest. A Dominican friar rushes to fetch a larger crucifix from the church of Saint-Sauveur. When it arrives, she asks that it be held high in her sight until the flames consume her. Her final comfort is not the king she crowned, not the generals she led, not the country she tried to save, but a cross held steady by strangers. The executioners lead her to the stake. The pyre towers above the crowd, stacked with dry wood and straw. This is not a quick, merciful fire. It is built for slow spectacle. Her ankles are chained, her waist bound. She is raised above the people, so no one can mistake the lesson. The English want the image burned into France as much as her body into ash. For a moment, silence presses over the square. Witnesses later say she cries out again, repeating the name of Jesus again and again, her last defense against the terror of fire. Soldiers hesitate to light the kindling. One captain admits later he fears damnation for what they are about to do, but hesitation doesn't last long in the machinery of war. The torch drops. Flames lick upward, first as wisps of smoke, then as greedy tongues that curl around the wood. The crowd leans forward. Some cheer, some cross themselves, some weep. A chronicler claims her voice rings out clearly over the crackling, shouting, "Jesus!" until the fire chokes it. Even her enemies cannot deny it. She does not curse, does not scream blasphemy, does not beg for mercy. She calls only for God. Here's a chilling historical tidbit. Executioners were ordered to burn her body until nothing remained, then rake through the ashes to expose her charred heart. Some swore it would not burn, even after repeated attempts. Others insist the story was invented to stoke her legend. Historians still argue whether the miraculous heart was fact or myth, but the persistence of the tale shows how quickly her martyrdom took root. When the fire dies, her ashes are swept into the Seine. No relics, no grave, nothing left to rally around. The English wanted obliteration, not remembrance, and yet, by trying to erase her, they immortalize her. People whisper of her courage, her visions, her final words. The girl they branded a witch becomes, within decades, a symbol of holy resistance. The irony is brutal. Charles VII, the king she crowned, does nothing to save her. He sends no ransom, no demand, no army. But after her death, when it is politically convenient, he quietly orders investigations into her trial. Years later, the church itself annuls the verdict, declaring the process corrupt. It's the classic move: disown someone while it's risky, claim them once it's safe. Her legend grows beyond the battlefield. In France, she becomes La Pucelle, the maid, saintly, even before canonization. In England, she remains the witch, at least for a century. Plays, poems, and chronicles twist her into propaganda both ways. Some see her as a fanatic manipulated by politics, others as a visionary whose faith eclipsed reason. Historians still debate where she falls: naive puppet, cunning strategist, or chosen vessel. What's undeniable is the raw humanity of her end. Strip away the myth, and you have a 19-year-old, terrified, abandoned, yet refusing to betray the voice she believed guided her. That detail, the unwavering faith even as flames closed around her, cements her as more than a medieval oddity. She becomes timeless because her death touches the nerve humans never stop prodding. What would I do standing in fire with the world calling me a fraud? The quirky, almost absurd detail is that some English soldiers reportedly begged for forgiveness after the execution, claiming nightmares haunted them for years. Burning a girl who prays to the end doesn't sit well on the conscience, no matter how much propaganda you swallow. Centuries later, Joan is canonized as a saint. The same church that condemned her raises her to its altars. The irony writes itself. A system that once burned her at the stake later burns incense before her statue. But this reversal is not unique. It is the story of how institutions use individuals when convenient, discard them when threatening, and rehabilitate them when politically useful. Joan is simply the most glaring example, her ashes carried away, but her legend rooted so deeply it outlives both England and Burgundy's ambitions. As the story closes, the square at Rouen remains imprinted in history. The flames are long gone, the crowd dispersed centuries ago, yet the image lingers. A teenager, abandoned by her king, condemned by priests, burned by soldiers, still whispering prayers until smoke swallows her voice. That is the horrifying truth of Joan of Arc, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the silence that followed, the stunned crowd realizing they had not destroyed a witch, but created a martyr. Because sometimes the most terrifying tortures don't end a story, they ignite it. The square at Rouen is empty now. The fire that raged hours ago is nothing more than faint smoke rising from charred wood, curling lazily into the sky before vanishing altogether. Where thousands of people once pressed against each other to watch, now silence stretches across the cobblestones. Soldiers have gone, priests have retired to their chambers, and townsfolk have wandered home carrying stories they will tell with pride or shame for years. But the stage, the pyre, and the ashes are gone, swept into the river as if erasing Joan of Arc from the earth were possible. And yet she lingers. The mind cannot quite release her. Even as the marketplace returns to ordinary life, her image hovers, a young girl at the stake, whispering prayers, refusing to curse her captors. History insists that her ashes were thrown into the Seine so no relic could ever rally her followers. But ironically, that act of erasure gave her a different kind of permanence. When there is no body, no tomb, no shrine, the memory itself becomes untouchable, impossible to burn away. Close your eyes and imagine the hush of the city after night falls. Windows shudder, candles snuff out, and yet in some homes, people lie awake, unsettled. Some feel shame at what they witnessed. Others feel fear that they saw a holy woman murdered. A few perhaps feel relief that a supposed witch is gone. But none of them sleep peacefully. The silence of Rouen after Joan's burning may be one of the heaviest silences in medieval memory. And from that silence, her story spreads. Not through official proclamations, the English wanted her forgotten, but through murmurs, tavern conversations, and whispered prayers. A farm girl who crowned a king, who led men into battle, who stood firm before fire. That image could not be drowned in the Seine. Here is the soft truth. Time begins to sand down the jagged edges of her suffering. The flames become less violent in memory, the chains less heavy, the jeering crowd less loud. Instead, what rises is the calm resilience she carried. Her voice, insistent and clear, becomes what people remember, not the smoke, not the terror, but her prayers. And in this way, she transforms. The horror dissolves into something quieter, almost comforting, the reminder that faith, conviction, and courage can exist even in the darkest of places. Centuries later, she will be canonized as a saint. Statues will rise, paintings will glow with her image, and churches will whisper her name with reverence. But even before that, her legend already moved gently like a lullaby across France. Parents would tell their children of the maid who stood unbroken, and children would drift off imagining her clad in armor, guided by unseen voices, blazing with belief. Now, as you listen, allow the noise of her trial, her battles, her execution to fade further. Breathe slowly, as if pulling the last embers into stillness. The story has ended, but the calm after is where it lingers longest. It teaches that even after fire, quiet remains. That even after cruelty, peace can arrive. Joan's end was violent, but her memory is tranquil now, a soft presence that hovers at the edge of sleep. Let yourself rest in that. Picture the empty square, the cobblestones cooling under moonlight, the river carrying ashes far downstream until they disappear into the sea. The story has been told, the suffering endured, and what remains is a gentle awareness that courage does not vanish with the body. It carries forward, quiet but steady, into every century that follows. So rest now. Let Joan's voice soften in your ears, not as fire, but as calm breath in the dark. Tomorrow, another tale will come, another shadow of history. For tonight, let her memory ease you into sleep.